All right, let's dive into one of the most important, most influential books you've probably never even heard of, because it was pretty much deliberately erased from history. We're talking about the Book of Enoch, a text that some people consider the lost prequel to the Bible itself. And the whole story, the whole reason it was so dangerous, boils down to one single, incredibly provocative question. What if the story you were told about fallen angels is completely backward? What if they weren't the villains at all, but were actually rebels who risked absolutely everything to help humanity out? And look, this isn't some fan fiction from the middle of nowhere. We're talking about a book that early church fathers treated as actual scripture. It's even quoted word for word in the New Testament book of Jude. So you have to ask yourself, why would a book that's important enough to be cited in the Bible get systematically banned, hidden, and basically scrubbed from the record? The answer to that is the whole story. Now, the story kicks off not with some cosmic war for power, but with what you could call the ultimate forbidden love story. You've got this group of angels, right? And they're looking down from heaven, and they see something that is about to change the entire course of history. According to the Book of Enoch, 200 of these angels, known as the Watchers, just became completely captivated by the beauty of human women. And this wasn't just some passing fancy. They wanted to build families. They literally said, "Let us choose wives and have children." They wanted to bridge that gap between the divine and the human. But this wasn't a rash decision. Not at all. Their leader, an angel named Samyaza, knew this was a terrible idea with catastrophic consequences. He was actually afraid he'd be the one left holding the bag, paying the price for this great sin. But the others, all of them, swore an oath together, vowing they would face whatever came their way as one. This was a conscious, deliberate choice they all made. So they come down to Earth, and they don't just take wives. They share everything they know. I mean, they taught humanity the foundations of civilization and science, things like how to forge metals for tools and armor, the secrets of cosmetics, astronomy, meteorology, even medicine and botany. And that, well, in the eyes of heaven, sharing all that knowledge was their greatest crime. Okay, so the children born from these unions were called the Nephilim. And this is where the official story takes a really dark turn, and it forces us to ask a critical question. Are we reading actual history here, or are we reading a very carefully crafted piece of propaganda? The Book of Enoch describes these children as, well, giants. And I don't just mean tall. The text says they were 3,000 ells high. Now that's an ancient measurement, but it could translate to nearly 2 miles high. We are talking about literal, skyscraper-sized beings who ended up devouring everything, including other people. But here's the crazy part. The Bible itself, over in Genesis, mentions the Nephilim too, but it doesn't call them cannibalistic monsters. Get this, it calls them the heroes of old, men of renown. So which one is it? Are they man-eating titans, or are they legendary heroes? That massive contradiction is the key to unlocking this entire mystery. This whole thing really only starts to make sense when you look at it through a Gnostic lens. The Gnostics were these early Christians who had a pretty radical idea. They believed the God of the Old Testament wasn't the one true God, but a lesser, kind of jealous being, a demiurge, who wanted to keep humanity trapped and ignorant. And from that point of view, anyone who tries to bring knowledge is a hero. And any story that paints them as a monster, well, that's just propaganda, right? So that brings us to God's reaction in this story. And if you keep that Gnostic lens on, his response doesn't look like the righteous judgment of a loving father. It looks like the brutal, jealous revenge of a tyrant who's losing control of his creation. I mean, just listen to what the archangels say when they go to report back to God. They reveal the true crime here. They don't start with all the violence or the giant children. No, they lead with this, that one of the Watchers, Azazel, revealed the eternal secrets. So the ultimate sin, the thing they were most upset about, wasn't murder. It was education. And God's response to this? It's absolute. He decides to just hit a cosmic reset button, the Great Flood. And the goal wasn't just to punish sin, it was to completely wipe the slate clean, to erase this newly enlightened version of humanity that had learned all these so-called forbidden secrets. And as for the Watchers, their punishment was just brutal. It was designed for maximum psychological torture. First, they were forced to watch their own giant children slaughter each other.
Then, after seeing all their loved ones destroyed in the flood, they were bound in total darkness for thousands of years, only to be finally thrown into a fiery prison for all of eternity.
When they begged for mercy, sending Enoch as their messenger, the response from God was swift and final. No forgiveness, no second chances, not now, not ever. This is a portrayal that is just so different from the idea of an all-forgiving God. This sounds more like a being who crushes any and all dissent, permanently.
But the story doesn't even end there. It takes this wild turn into something that sounds way less like theology and a whole lot more like science fiction. Because Enoch gets taken on a guided tour of the cosmos.
Enoch says he was lifted up into the heavens, and he starts to approach the structure that's totally unlike anything on Earth. The first thing he sees is this great wall, but it's not made of stone. He says it's built out of living, vibrating crystal. And this crystal wall isn't just sitting there. He says it's surrounded by what he can only describe as tongues of fire, moving and pulsing around it, almost like some kind of energy field or protective barrier. Then, inside, he sees this incredible throne. But again, it's not gold or marble. He describes it as being made of crystal, with wheels that shine like the sun itself. I mean, that sounds less like a king's chair and more like some kind of advanced power core or engine. And from underneath this throne, streams of flaming fire are just pouring out. You really have to wonder, if you were an ancient man trying to describe impossibly advanced technology, what words would you even have to use? Which leads to the wildest question of all. Is Enoch having a vision of a spiritual realm we call heaven? Or is he describing, with the only language available to him, the command center of a massive, otherworldly vessel? The tour keeps going, and he's shown what's called the prison for the angels. But it's not a lake of fire like you might imagine. He describes it as a chaotic, formless void outside of creation itself, where conscious beings as large as stars are bound up and burn for eternity. That's a concept more at home in cosmic horror than any Sunday school lesson. So, after all that, what are we supposed to make of this? Well, the interpretation we've been exploring suggests the Book of Enoch isn't literal history, but a really powerful allegory. In this view, the Watchers are like Prometheus from the Greek myths, heroes who bring the fire of knowledge to humanity. The story of the monstrous Nephilim, that becomes a scare tactic, a fear campaign to discourage enlightenment. God's brutal punishment stands for the violent suppression of human potential. And Enoch's bizarre visions aren't literal space travel, but shifts into higher states of consciousness. And this all matters because it reframes this ancient myth as an ongoing struggle, not between good and evil, but between control and freedom, between enforced ignorance and the dangerous, liberating power of knowledge. Which really just leaves us with one final question for you to think about. When you look at the whole story through this lens, were the Watchers really villains, trying to corrupt us? Or were they heroes who saw our potential and risked eternal damnation just to give us the keys to our own freedom? The answer you choose changes everything.